Should you set a big, audacious, crazy goal or a series of small, more reasonable technical goals? What I want to do in this video is discuss how I think both of these goals are vital for your success when it comes to improving your artistic game and achieving whatever goals you set out to achieve. Let's get started. Alright, just quickly, my name's Tim McBurney and I've been a professional working artist for 20 years, and I'm here on this channel, the Drawing Codex, to help you draw stuff from your imagination, to embrace the challenge of drawing, and to master the craft of line and color illustration. Now, when I started out, I had a lot of big, audacious, crazy goals. I wanted to be a famous artist. I wanted to be a published comic book artist. Again, I managed to get published and actually, get published in the European French market, which is something I always wanted to do and was very kind of, seemed impossible at the time. Someone from Australia speaks English. How do I, follow my dreams and work, in the same industry that, my favorite artists like, Mobius sort of worked in? But I kind of managed to make that happen. Now, I think it's true that often people who do have sort of big goals don't often achieve them, right? I think there's often you see a pattern there. And I think the other sort of side of it is that, often people who kind of are sort of organized and have a lot of sort of smaller goals, and we're talking about, creating, goals that are very, very measurable, things that are inside your sphere of influence, etc., chunking things down, getting into productivity, tracking. I think that often people who talk about those things are more likely to be the types of people who achieve things. But I do think it's really important to combine both of these ideas, and that's really what I want to talk about in this video. So both of these things are really important. The big goal is what you can consider to be like the poster on the wall, right? It's when you're 10 years old and you've got a poster of some, magical place you want to live, or, a poster of a Lamborghini or something like that. And you're kind of like, I just want this thing. That big goal is really, really important, because it's often that big goal that's really going to help us have that sort of true north and understand kind of where we're going. And I think it really is a matter of sort of having a singular thing that we can remember easily, that we know if we achieved would sort of prove to the world that we are who we are. Small goals are a little bit different. The small goals are more about the tactical solutions and the tactical little goalposts we make along the way. It's the steps we take along the journey. And I think the art of understanding small goals is more about understanding what's measurable, what's realistic, and what's going to allow us to chunk down those larger goals into small enough pieces where we're actually going to be able to see and track progress. In many ways, I think the big goals aren't something that we choose. They're something that chooses us. And I think they have to be linked in some way to a deeper purpose. These things can be outrageous, and I think it's better if they are outrageous. When we're setting big goals, this is more about wanting to be an astronaut, wanting to be a fireman, wanting to be a famous artist, wanting to be published, wanting to work at a AAA game studio. These things are all, some of them are harder than others, some of them are more approachable and realistic depending on sort of where you are in life, but they're all things where probably the number of people who want to do them is much less than the number of people who actually end up doing it. So there's challenges along the way. This is an outrageous, unrealistic, unrestrained idea and a desire. And I think it's important to have those. When I was growing up, again, I always read and wanted to draw comic books. And that's kind of, as I said, what I ended up doing. But not just comic books, but I wanted to work in the French comic book industry. And I'm from Australia, probably as you can tell from my accent. And I'm not from a big city in Australia. And that goal seemed outrageous and unrealistic. I grew up though, reading Tintin and Asterix, which were, European comics that were published internationally. And I just really liked those. I liked the way that they looked. I liked the care and attention that was put into them. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. That was a big, outrageous goal, but it was very unrealistic. It was very impossible. Everyone that I knew sort of was like, either you're crazy, you'll never do that, don't worry, get a real job, etc., etc. I mean, the classic stuff, right? I'm sure if you're an artist, again, you deal with that stuff of people kind of, viewing that desire as unrealistic to a certain degree, and almost as unrealistic as being an astronaut, just sort of thinking that will never happen, and if it does, you'll be a starving artist. So again, I think it's important to have these big goals, important not to restrain them, and important to make sure that you understand how they relate to, again, your deeper purpose and a why. It's less about sort of choosing one at random, and it's more a matter of maybe choosing them from a small pool of things that you want, of strong, large desires that you have, and choosing to focus on one that you think is really going to make you sort of happy. The point here is that often what we're doing is we have an internal sort of version of ourselves, of who we want to be, a projection into the future of who we are, what we care about, what we stand for, and we see that poster on the wall as being a symbol for that. Getting published, having your name on a book, working on it at a AAA game studio, are things that if you achieve it, it will be solid proof that you've sort of turned that desire into a real thing. And again, once you do that, things will change, because you'll be able to say, look at this real thing that happened. This is proof that I am, a good artist, and that people value my work. And I think it's, again, it's a way of turning that internal desire into an external proven thing, so that the world knows you are who you think you are. If you want to hear a little bit more about my advice on getting work, becoming an illustrator, you can check out my free illustration mini workshop. It talks a lot about how to get more detail and polish in your work, and how to think about beginning your journey working as a professional artist. Go check it out. The link will be in the description. What can we say about small goals? Small goals are almost the opposite of that. They are the little steps that we take along the journey as we try and achieve those larger goals. I think that it's important to understand that often the smaller goals need to be more like tactical solutions to problems. We want to focus, when we're setting small goals, on breaking down that larger desire into things that are more manageable, that we can sort of achieve in smaller amounts of time, that are more within our sphere of influence. And what we're mostly trying to do is sort of prove to ourselves, can I make progress? Can I prove to myself that I'm actually on the journey towards that larger poster on the wall, that symbol of, self-actualization, or however you want to put it. If you take my example again of wanting to draw French comic books, this seemed like it was an impossible task, and in many ways it was. But the goal there was to break that down and try and figure out, okay, if I did want to become a comic book artist, what would I need to do? What kind of artist would I need to be? What are all the skills that I would need to build? And that would be things like anatomy, storytelling. If you're a French comic book artist, often, you need to get good at hand lettering, which I never did. But again, that might be something that you would sort of want to, work on, is like your handwriting, your panel composition, your storytelling. If you want to write them yourself, you need to get good at writing, facial expression. So, there's a range of skills that each, big artistic goal is going to have. And the skills that you would need for drawing comics are going to be a little bit different to the skills that you would need to work in a AAA game studio. And they might be different to the skills you would need to work in a smaller game studio, where maybe you're less specialized and you're more working on a larger range of artistic sort of projects. In any case, the small goals are how we get there. It is more about reading the productivity books, of tracking progress, of chunking things down, making that impossible thing possible by, again, breaking it down into smaller parts that we know we can achieve, and making sure that we understand where our sphere of influence is. So, for instance, getting published in the French comic book industry to me was well outside my sphere of influence when I began. Now I think it is within my sphere of influence. I can probably make that happen if I want. But at the time, that was impossible. But there are things that, again, will help me get there, that help me build towards that are within my sphere of influence. I can work on my anatomy. I can do test pages. I can work on my storytelling. I can improve my faces. I can improve my expressions. I can think about what kind of comic would I want to draw first, what do I think I'd be good at, and I can help build my visual library for that. I wanted to draw fantasy stuff, so I got better at drawing armor and swords and all these things that I knew would probably need to be a part of that sort of first project that I took on, which ended up being a pirate book, which was completely different. But again, it was a matter of sort of understanding how to sort of build those things and get to that point and work on things that I knew I could work on. And again, that's what you need to do with your smaller goals, is create manageable, reasonable, more systematic ways of sort of achieving things. And again, as I said, often this is how we actually achieve stuff. But you need those bigger goals to motivate yourself to get there, because the smaller goals can be a little bit more sort of menial and there's less direction. It's easy with small goals to get a little bit sidetracked and work too much on them. And that can be the danger. If you don't keep the big goal in sight, it's very easy, for instance, to just kind of keep working on your anatomy skills. That's like a smaller goal. You don't need to become the best anatomy sort of person unless you want to teach it. But it's very easy for people to sort of lose sight of that larger goal of what they want to achieve and sort of get stuck in the weeds of these smaller things. So that's why, again, I think they're both really important. The big goal is where we're going, and the smaller goal are the little steps that we're taking, the little points along the way that we're trying to use to measure our progress so that we know I'm not there yet, but I'm moving in the right direction. It's going to happen one day. Hopefully that gives you an idea for how I view this and how I break these things down. There's two more points that I want to go over that I think are almost more important once we get an understanding for the difference between big and large goals. The first is that you need to be careful what you wish for. And this is a tricky one because, again, I think that often what's happening when we see that poster on the wall, we see the Lamborghini, you have that desire to be a published author, whatever it is that there's a certain amount of ego involved. And there's a certain amount of maybe us not being sure that we are that person. Because often, again, the symbol and the thing that we're achieving is not really the thing that's going to make us happy. It's kind of a symbol that we have arrived at a certain point. And if you're kind of looking for external validation of that, as in, I'm looking for a person at a studio to hire me, and that will sort of tell me, oh, I've reached a certain skill level, and therefore I am an amazing artist, or I've become published, and that means I am, a published author. Those are just labels, and they're labels that are based around sort of the ego side of things. And again, I don't think that's all bad. I think that, as I said, you can have really big, audacious, sort of very materialistic, shallow goals that can propel us in a really good direction. Because again, those big goals are just there to get us moving, right? They're there to motivate us. And I think that really good things can happen from being sort of shallow and materialistic. Again, as long as at some point you kind of realize, look, this stuff is not actually going to make you happy. You need to, understand what your purpose on this planet is and make sure that the things you're doing sort of align with that. That's the sort of stuff that will make you a lot happier. The problem with those big goals is that often they are based on a very simplistic view of the world and what those goals actually mean. So we're using them to symbolize our own achievement, but we're often not really understanding what they are. So, I know a lot of people who spend many, many, many years getting to the point where they do get hired by an amazing AAA game studio, and then they realize it really isn't for them and it really doesn't make them happy. And that's because, again, the symbol is sort of good for us getting to a certain point, but actually doing that is a completely different thing. You need to do a job and you need to figure out whether that's something you actually want to do. And I think it's really important to understand, is that thing actually linked to your deeper purpose and your personality and what you actually want to achieve? And often, just understand, like, life goes on after you reach those big goals, and you either need new big goals or you need to understand, what you actually want in life. So, for instance, again, I know that a lot of people work at those AAA game studios, and they actually end up being a lot happier working at a smaller studio where they have more creative control, and they feel like they're part of a team that's kind of tight knit, and there's a lot of sort of personal relationships there, versus sort of being in a giant sort of factory of other people. And again, that's based on personality. The key here is just be careful what you wish for, because it could happen. And if you work hard enough, it's very likely that it will happen. Make sure it's what you actually want. In my situation, again, I wanted to be that published author, but I thought that would immediately sort of make me sort of famous, right? It would sort of have a lot more meaning. And the reality is that, what I really wanted out of that was to tell stories and create these books and have a lot of creative control over them and sort of share that with an audience. And that's really all that mattered. Whether it was published or not published didn't really change that. It didn't really have a giant effect on that. And I think probably, again, it's more important there to think about sort of telling stories and having an audience and sort of paying attention to that, as opposed to what I was doing, which is kind of focusing just on like get published, because that is kind of the symbol for how I sort of tell that I've made it. And again, it's not necessarily the thing that's going to make you happy or, again, even propel your career forward in a way that you really, really want. So really, really important to be careful what you wish for, because it probably will happen if you work really hard at it. And if it's kind of not what you want, then maybe there would have been a quicker way for you to actually get what you want. The second and last point that I want to make, that is, again, linked to these things, but in many ways the most important thing, is that you need to stay the course. It's really tricky when you're in the weeds working on these smaller things. When you actually want a big goal, it can be stifling to be constantly working on these smaller things and slogging away, working on your anatomy, working on your rendering, practicing these things and building up your skill sets. But the way that often these big goals that we're trying to achieve, these symbols occur, is that they sort of pop up as opportunities that come and go. And you don't get a lot of opportunities, and you do have to be prepared to take them. In many ways, what you're trying to do through a series of smaller goals is build yourself into a person who is going to be able to take advantage of these opportunities that do come along. And this is something I often say to students, is that you need to be prepared to kind of catch that wave that comes. I teach at a school, and, I often tell students, you need to have your portfolio ready to go. Don't worry about whether you think it's ready to go. Just have a good representation of where you are and who you are as an artist, because you never know when some art director is going to, send me an email and say, hey, you work at a school, right? Do you know any sort of good students? We're looking for an entry-level student. And I need to know, can I send that person there? Are they ready to take that wave? Are they prepared for it? And, it could be like, I see a lot of potential, but, if they're not really ready, and if they don't even have a portfolio, if they're not sort of set up, if they haven't been working, I can see a lot of potential in someone, and I can tell they're making progress, but I can also tell that they're not ready to take that opportunity yet. And what you need to do is make sure you are ready. That's what you're trying to do, to build yourself up into the person who is capable of taking that opportunity. So, when I was trying to figure out how to, draw French comic books, Again, to me that was an impossible task. It was never going to happen, but still I worked on it. I was like, well, but I still want to be the type of person who would be able to do that. And maybe if I keep working on that, it'll sort of happen. So I kept working on my anatomy. I kept working on my, skills, even though I was working as an illustrator and I was actually working in video games at the time, and working on a large range of different things. But one day, David Chevelle, the editor on Seven Pirates, sent me an email and said, "Do you want to do this book?" And it was because I'd kind of been working at that opportunity came to me, and I was obviously able to say, that is actually what I want to do. I'm going to do it, and to say yes, and to put all my effort and focus into that, and sort of drop a bunch of other opportunities and kind of go in that direction. And it's important to understand that, again, those opportunities don't come up all the time, but they are kind of floating around, right? There's these waves of opportunity that, roll through life. And if you're prepared for them, you can catch the wave. And the more prepared you are, and the more you've sort of built yourself into a person who's going to be able to do that, the more waves are going to come your way, and the easier and more effective you're going to be as you sort of take the wave. Because again, just because he sent me an email and said, "Hey, do you want to do this?" It doesn't mean I got it. That's an opportunity to prove that I was going to be able to do that I understood the project, that the test page was okay, and that's a story for another day. It was not an easy kind of like, easy thing. It was an ordeal even to sort of get that project at the time and actually get the contract signed. So I guess what I'd say is you really do have to have faith in that larger goal, and you need to keep building yourself into the person who is the type of person who is able to achieve that larger goal, so that when that opportunity arises, again, you can take the wave and ride it where you need to go. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks for hanging out and talking about vaguely philosophical, productivity-minded stuff with this goal subject. Let me know how these goals have affected your life, whether you have these big sort of audacious goals, whether you've given up on them. Again, it's okay to give up on them and find other goals, and again, figure out what you truly want in life. Again, that's the most important thing. But this is all I've got. Catch you around. Happy drawing.